Hi, everyone. I'm Suzanne Clemens, one of the pastors at Trinity United Methodist Church in Lafayette, Indiana, and it is a joy for me to be sharing today's message with you all. The sermon this week is inspired by a passage of a lectionary text from the book of Hebrews in the New Testament. And the entire passage is longer. It starts with Hebrews 11, verse 29, and goes through Hebrews chapter 12, verse 3. But I'm going to highlight probably what's the core few verses of this section of text. So hear with me now the words from Hebrews chapter 12, the first three verses of that chapter. So then, with endurance, let's also run the race that is laid out in front of us, since we have such a cloud of witnesses surrounding us. Let's throw off any extra baggage, get rid of the sin that trips us up, and fix our eyes on Jesus, faith's pioneer and perfecter. He endured the cross, ignoring the shame, for the sake of the joy that was laid out in front of him, and sat down at the right side of God's throne. Well, we are a society that loves our races, don't we? Right? So if you are listening to us today from the Lafayette area where I am, there is no shortage of opportunities to run or walk a 5K in our community. And for the more fit and adventurous, there are 10Ks, mini marathons, and at a greater distance, there are triathlons. Some of us who like to participate in these things got our start in track or cross country in school, but our local races are really open to any of us, right, at every fitness level. Just a few weeks ago, I volunteered at Jeff High School, which is right down the road from me. They have an annual Band on the Run 5K, which is a fundraiser for the Jeff Band programs. And some of you here in the Lafayette area have probably participated in the annual Fall Hunger Hike along the river, raising funds for Lafayette Urban Ministry. A few years ago, our schools started a fundraiser cupcake run. Maybe some of you have done the Columbian Park Zoo Run or the Thanksgiving Day Turkey Trot. So I'm guessing that many of you listening have some experience with a race of some kind. Well, 9 years ago, I did something that I had never done before and that I have not done since in my life. I trained for and ran a half marathon, which is 13.1 miles. And the year before I did this, I had been in poor health. I'd been dealing with a chronic condition that was painful and had really worn me down. And in December of that year, though, I was able to have surgery that was healing and really made an immediate difference in my quality of life. And I decided that as soon as I came home from the hospital that I was going to begin a new chapter. I wanted to be healthy. I wanted to feel well, to take care of myself, and to have a better quality of life. So as I recovered, I began, for one thing, eating differently, more healthfully. And once I was cleared to begin moving and exercising, I started walking, that is, on a treadmill in my basement. And after a few weeks of walking, I started jogging a little bit. Sluggishly, I might add, just for brief stretches along with my walking. Well, the stretches of jogging slowly got longer. And then once spring came and the weather warmed up outside, I started jogging and walking outside. I would jog for a stretch and then walk for a stretch and jog and walk. Started out just a mile or two, and then I worked up to 3 miles. And one Saturday I thought, I wonder if I could go for 5 miles. And I did, and I was amazed. I had never run that far in my entire life, and it felt good. Not at first, though. Pretty much every time I started running my ankles would hurt. And for the first mile, I thought, I'm not going to last this long this time. But often by the third mile, I usually found the sweet spot of running. Well, after about 4 months of this, I started seeing publicity about the Purdue Half Marathon coming up in October. And I thought, I think I could do that. And I began researching how to train for a half marathon. And what I learned is that the main thing required was really a patient diligence. You just had to keep running. You had to fix your eyes just on that one practice. Keep running. At least a few short runs a week of a few miles, and then increasingly longer run one day a week. So that's what I did. So I committed my Saturday mornings to my longer runs, slowly working up to 6 miles, 7 miles, and on up, and I was doing it. My body was actually coming through, and the running got easier. And by this time, I was really not doing much walking at all. And I could even run up inclines. I had developed stamina, and my body had transformed into lean muscle. People could look at me and tell that I was doing something differently. And another chronic condition that I had suffered from for decades, well, it melted away from the healing effects of the running. I could hardly believe the transformation. Well, race day came in October, and it was cold and rainy. And I felt lousy the morning of the race and wondered if I was going to be able to pull through. And also, what crazy thing have I set out to do here? My longest run up to that point was about 11 miles, and I would have to put in 13.1 miles that morning. And fear set in. Would the preparation see me through this crazy goal that a year before I would never have imagined for myself? Well, folks, I did it. And I don't even remember my exact finish time. It took me over 2.5 hours to run it, but I crossed the finish line. And I am a slow runner, but for most of us out there that day, we just wanted to finish. And people were there all along the way, cheering us on, sprinkling rain and all. And I finished tired, wet, and not very pretty either. And I know this because there were photographers stationed along the course taking pictures of us who were running. And they sent us the pictures after the race, and I can assure you that these were not glamour shots by any stretch of the imagination. But it felt so good to complete that race. And I planned to keep up my running. I wanted to stay in shape and maintain the level of health that I had achieved. And for a while, as winter set in, I ran on the treadmill in my basement. But I really am a true Southern girl, and I do not like the cold. So I don't like to run in the cold. But truth be told, I don't like to run on the treadmill either. And gradually, I found this a difficult practice to keep up. I was becoming not that invested. And gradually, I quit going down to the basement to run on the treadmill. When spring comes, I told myself, I'll pick up running again. But by the time spring arrived, I had fallen out of rhythm. I had lost the endurance that I had gained. I was no longer fixed on a goal. And without the attention and commitment to those regular runs, I lost what I had gained. And the chronic condition that I had dealt with for so many years before returned. I had taken for granted that I would be able to keep my endurance up without living out the pattern that had led to endurance. I quit paying attention and caring for and investing and fixing on the things that had made the difference. This week, I attended the funeral of a young man, a young 20-year-old man. And as his beautiful, creative, gifted, hard, deep, and all too short life was remembered, his mother, At the end of her eulogy, she spoke directly to the young people who were gathered to mourn the passing of their dear friend. And she spoke to them with urgency. And what she said was, stop living out of a mindset of competition. She said, life isn't a contest. Don't compare yourselves with others and quit being so hard on yourselves. Lighten up, be gentle with yourself, and stay connected to your family and your friends. Make time for the people and the things that truly matter. Her son had been a deep seeker, a deep feeler, and he had cared about the world and especially for people who suffered. And he had experienced his share of suffering too. And we are all graced at some point with those moments when the veil between earth and heaven becomes thin, and moments when just the sacredness of life becomes tender and palpable to us. And the purpose of the marathon of life becomes clear and convicting. And we're given the opportunity to examine, well, first, how do I know the course? Because so much in the world around me is leading me off course. And third, or second, how in the world do I build the endurance to do this? Well, we simply cannot run the marathon of our lives alone, drawing from our own energy and willpower. We will inevitably be fatigued, derailed, and worn out. And the good news for us is that we were never intended to run the marathon alone. We need the source of life, of goodness, of our very breath to sustain us. We need faith in a goodness and source larger than ourselves. And we need the example of Jesus to guide us. If we look to Jesus for how to run the course of life, what do we see? We see a life of prayer. Jesus was always trusting in and connecting with God, following the way that cultivated true strength. And what was it that drew people to Jesus? Well, Jesus had a depth, a compassion, a serenity, a gentle assuredness that was utterly captivating to people. He was able to be fully present with everyone he encountered, seeing them and embracing them in a way that healed them and restored them. Jesus loved everyone, and he shared life. He ate with and he partied with all of the people, rich and poor alike, those supposedly in his tribe and those on the outside. And in fact, he had a special regard for those who were excluded, for those who were in pain, for those who were lost and vulnerable. And he stood in proximity to them with ease, from a place of depth, care, and centeredness. He was carefree, vulnerable in his day-to-day living, trusting only in God's guidance and goodness. And he was able to be dependent on the people and communities around him. He had this vulnerable dependability on his circle. Jesus held no grudges, and he offered forgiveness and full acceptance to everyone. Jesus spoke the truth, always out of a place of love. Everything that he did came from a source of deep love, a love that flowed from Father to Son, and a love that flows to each one of us. And as the writer of Hebrews tells us, all that we have to do to complete our marathon of life is to fix our eyes on Jesus, right? How did Jesus do it? How did he prepare? How did he endure? And we know that there was much that Jesus endured. Again, from Hebrews, he endured the cross, ignoring the shame for the sake of the joy that was laid out before him. And in his meditation on what it means to endure the cross, theologian Louis Savory writes that enduring the cross means more than accepting and bearing the losses and burdens of our lives. Certainly we do that, but enduring the cross also means accepting the responsibilities and the challenges of being an unconditionally loving person living in Jesus's way. So fixing our eyes on Jesus, following the pattern and the rhythm set by Jesus will transform us, heart, mind, and soul. It will deepen our souls and kindle a joy that we cannot manufacture on our own. And just like the runner goes for another mile, hardly believing that just by continuing to put one foot in front of another, with patience and over time, that their capacity for breath and stamina is transformed. Well, so it is that when we let go of our fears and concerns for ourselves, trusting in Jesus' way of unconditional love, that we become new people, capable of deeper love, of deeper trust. And when with faith we live our lives for others, living in ways that relieve the burdens of others, we will be transformed ourselves, growing gradually in graciousness and compassion and patient endurance. And we sure do need endurance, don't we? Because we live in a mysterious world where joy and beauty coexist with disorder and pain. One day we are stopped in our tracks by a glowing, glorious sunset, right? What we see as clearly a blessing of creation. And then the next day, our beloved cat pees in our laundry basket. We're rewarded with a bonus at work, and then the alternator on our car goes out. We live in a world where medical diagnoses leave us stunned, where pandemics hang on for 2 years and 5 months and counting, where 20-year-old young men pass away. Our lives will contain beauty and brokenness. And our scripture today attests to this. As the lives of those in the cloud of witnesses is recounted, the word affirms that life has been and always will be a pretty random mix of joys and hardship, success and defeat, of beauty and pain. And there's a misunderstanding sometimes in Christianity that if hardship befalls us, that God must be distant or that we've somehow not been faithful. But that is a misunderstanding. All the situations of our lives, the joy and the suffering, are opportunities for God's deepening life in us, for us to grow tender instead of hard, forgiving instead of bitter, grateful instead of resentful, compassionate and loving instead of self-centered. And as we've already acknowledged, we can't do this on our own. Our hope and our encouragement comes from the source who came to show us the way, who is with us every step of the way, cheering us, loving us, transforming us. So I ask each of you, what leads to God's deepening life in you in the journey of life? How do you stay connected to the source that is love so that you have endurance for the marathon that is your life? Thanks be to our God who promises to be faithful to us every step of the way.